Live from the world headquarters of RT America in our nation's capital, this is the news with Rick Sanchez.
Hi, everybody. I'm Rick Sanchez, and I want to welcome our viewers from all over the world, especially those of you who are watching us on the portable TV app. So I was jogging this morning, and suddenly my phone goes off, starts buzzing. You know, that buzzing sound that alerts you that you might have breaking news coming in, a bulletin. That's what it said, bulletin. All Americans are now being advised to leave Afghanistan immediately. And then it goes on to say that the U.S. Embassy can no longer guarantee the safety of Americans who are living in Afghanistan. So I thought to myself, duh, breaking news? Really? This is breaking news? I mean, on this newscast, we have been reporting that same thing for the better part of 2 weeks now. Yet somehow today is when it seems that many of our competitors finally realized that the Taliban are overrunning the country. Today, this morning, as I was jogging, no less. But you know what? Our coverage of Afghanistan here in this country, in America, our coverage of Afghanistan from the beginning has been at best biased and at worst non-existent. Take, for example, when our troops first went back in 2001 and they first took over a huge Taliban stronghold called Kandahar. Look at these headlines. You see those? It was a huge deal. Lead story on every network, front page story on every newspaper. But then when the Taliban took back Kandahar, the coverage was either extremely limited or even just non-existent. In fact, for the past 15 years, the war in Afghanistan has barely even been covered, as it became known in many circles as the Forgotten War, for a good reason. And why did that happen? Do we only cover wars that we win? Is that honest? Is that fair? How about journalistically ethical? So this is what we're going to do. We're going to drill down on how this important story has been for so long, for most of the corporate media, not important enough to cover. Let me underscore what I just said. Somehow we decided that a war is not important enough to cover. Let that sink in and ask yourself, if a war is not newsworthy, then what the hell is? This is the news with Rick Sanchez, where, as we say, it is time to do news again. All right, this is the list of the questions we think you're going to be asking. We start with this one. Why are Americans just now being told about the Afghanistan reality? Travel is about to get really confusing. Where can you fly, even if you're vaccinated? And what are Bill Gates, Jeff Bezos, and Michael Bloomberg doing in Greenland? I don't have to tell you this, but for those of you who perhaps get your news from another source from time to time, let me repeat my lead from last night, how we started the newscast. Afghanistan has just turned into Vietnam. It's a war with the U.S. troops and citizens there now racing to get out. Many of us grew up with those images of the Viet Cong overrunning Saigon, and now the same thing seems to be happening in Kabul. And that is where correspondent Bilal Sarway is reporting from tonight.
Well, the Mandigak Palace, which has been a sign of power in Kandahar province over the last 20 years, also the home of the former police chief of Kandahar, General Razik, was taken by the Taliban. The provincial governor's office, was also the site of some surrenders. According to some accounts, the governor of the province is only left with the 6 or 7 of his bodyguards. He's refusing to leave. He's from Kandahar. We heard reports of heavy fighting between the Taliban Taliban and members of the Kandahar police inside the police headquarters, as well as in the upscale Ainomena township. We have to really remember that Kandahar is the home of senior Taliban leaders and commanders. This is where they started their movement in the 1990s. And Kandahar is where Afghan special forces and commandos over the last many years have paid a massive risk of trying to protect the strategic districts as well as the city itself. We saw the Taliban breaching parts of the city over the last 7 to 8 weeks. We also saw American drones carrying out airstrikes against the Taliban, but there were also many mass surrenders of police forces from various tribes over the last 18 months or so. What is very concerning for the Afghan government, that there's very heavy fighting in the center of Herat city with several key government buildings being taken by the Taliban. We know that the former Mujahideen commander Ismail Khan, who was a one-time Taliban prisoner in the 1990s, is putting a stiff resistance, but it's not clear what, if any, impact that might have. We're also getting reports of heavy fighting on the outskirts of the city of Mazar-e Sharif in the district of Dedadi, not very far from the 209 Shaheen Corps. That is to protect the northern provinces, but the front line is just outside of the main army base. So you have a very difficult situation for the Afghan special forces, for the Afghan government, because this is the moment of panic. The Taliban have created that deliberately.
Balil, we thank you for that report, and joining the show now to discuss the situation in Afghanistan, America's forgotten war, as it's often called, is Fordham professor Robin Anderson. She's the author of A Century of Media, A Century of War. Thanks so much, Professor, for joining us. As we look at this situation that's going on right now in Afghanistan, we can't help but wonder, what is it about this war that bored Americans so much that it went on for 20 years and nobody gave a hell and nobody in the media even covered it? And is that possibly because the media is so chummy with members of the military who are on their shows every day that they don't bother to ask them hard questions?
Well, absolutely. The military-industrial complex, what I've written a lot about, and some of my colleagues have also, is how it's a military-industrial entertainment complex. And I think the American public got very bored with Afghanistan because the embedded troops told them one side of the story. That was they went in with the U.S. military. They were guided and they were chaperoned by them, and they didn't really show them some of the realities and the brutalities that can happen in the field of battle. Also, we had a lot of films, video games. Soldiers came back. People started playing them, especially young men who wanted to be recruited. And of course, those video games were also training the soldiers. So we turned war into a fictional entertainment. And when the war went bad and the American public went against the war, there's not much else to talk about a war that descended into special operations, brutality, and drone warfare. And it's very much about the United States government withholding information, lying to the press, creating fictions such as Obama's supposed withdrawal, don't forget, in December of 2014, where he said we were ending the war and we were going to get out of Afghanistan responsibly and that we're all safer from it. Clearly now that has been shown to be just as you point out, like the Vietnam War. And I remember the Vietnam War of the people within the embassy being taken off the embassy in Saigon with the helicopters.
You can only be lied to, though, as you suggest, if you want to be lied to, or if you're foolish enough to be lied to, or perhaps if you're being paid enough that you accept the lie and look the other way. And that seems to be what happens with the only two types of persons in this country who can actually do something and call these scoundrels out. Our politicians, who are essentially bought, and our media, who are kind of bought as well. Am I wrong?
Well, not really. It's very impossible for the media when they're very tied to the military for footage, for entertainment. The Pentagon liaison officer supplies equipment for feature films in Hollywood. Those are the blockbuster films. The same computer graphics that train pilots, the same computer software that drops drones are also used as components for designing, first-person shooter games. It's very independent. It's very impossible for the media to take an independent stance when their financial structures and their research and development is very tied up with the military-industrial complex.
Even if so many soldiers and so many of our own brothers and sisters are dying over there, even if we're ruining that part of the world, even if we're spending trillions of dollars, they still won't tell the truth because of the cozy relationships that you just explained. Let me just say, that ain't right. Thank you, Professor. We thank you for that dose of honesty. By the way, earlier in the show, I mentioned the fact that we started covering this story weeks ago, and many are now just catching up to it. It was not lost on many of you. We've received thousands of comments regarding our coverage of Afghanistan, like these, for example. One viewer writes, "News like this brings hope to us, yearning for unbiased and dispassionate research and analysis." Thank you. That's a nice comment. We appreciate that. And then there's this comment about the question that I asked on the air. Why didn't we learn our lesson? Last time I checked, war is decided by the president and the billionaires that fund him, not American society as a whole. You're right. But even the president and the billionaires can't do that alone. They need help. And you know where they get that help? On network newscasts who have sweetheart deal arrangements with the Marys from the NSA and Tom from the Pentagon and Javier from the State Department, you name it. Many of those are the very people who screwed up in Afghanistan and in Iraq and in other places, but they're buddies with the hosts at Fox News and ABC and CNN. So who's going to question the screw up? You guessed it, nobody. And that's part of the reason the truth about wars is no longer told. We'll be right back. Hey, welcome back. I'm Rick Sanchez. One of our questions that you saw at the top of the show was, where can you fly even if you're vaccinated? See, these days, the answer to that question can be really, really confusing, especially when you consider it's not really just about whether or not you're vaccinated, it's about which country you plan to go to, because it seems like for as many countries as there are probably as many regulations and rules. NRS correspondent Farron Franzak is here to join us now to tell us about what she found out when she poked her head into this quagmire.
And boy, was it fun doing that. No. So let's first talk about, we had a new Mayo Clinic study that came out where it talks about, really quick, the efficacy of each of these vaccines. And it was very interesting. So Director Kevin, let's throw that first graphic up there. So you have the first one, what's the efficacy of Pfizer, Moderna, and the Johnson & Johnson? The first one
somewhere in the fuzz it's going to appear.
Right, somewhere here.
It's coming. There it is.
There it
golly.
is. So for the first one, you'll see Pfizer 76%, Moderna 86%, J&J 72%. Then you'll see how they are as far as the Delta variant, just the Delta variant. Pfizer's 39%, Moderna's still studying, but Johnson & Johnson 71%. But then you have this big soup that we're living in with the COVID and the Delta, where they're kind of in a mesh together. They looked at that, and you see Pfizer drops significantly to 42%. Moderna shoots up 76%.
So tell me what that means. Pfizer is 42% of what?
Meaning right now, with the Delta variant swimming around with COVID, it's now only 42% effective.
But that's for people who have been vaccinated?
Who have been vaccinated,
okay.
Yes. So now that we got this soup of the Delta and all these other variants, swarming around, Pfizer's showing that it's not as effective as they originally thought it would be with these new variants.
By golly, that's the one I got.
Right, and same here. And so, Team Pfizer, who knows? But you have the CDC, they're coming out with this and looking at this because they are seeing at least there's 1 million Americans right now that are getting a booster shot, and they're not supposed to be.
Right.
And you're not supposed to be. The CDC doesn't want you to mix vaccines. So if you got the Pfizer one time, they don't want you to go and get Moderna as your booster. They're saying wait, especially for healthy people, you don't need a booster yet. But then that goes into where can you travel, where can't you travel? So here's the list of countries, and it's a long list. If you're vaccinated, you're pretty much kind of open season right now. But as far as the unvaccinated travel, and when you're rewatching this, you can pause and check and see if your country's on there that you want to go to. But as far as the unvaccinated, you'll see the country starts to go down a little bit. And that's where then enter Southwest Airlines, where they're saying, hey, we're seeing a major fallout, as far as traveling, because now you have states like New York where they're going to be mandating you have to show a COVID passport in order to get into baseball games, Broadway, everything. And
so as confusing as it is, it sounds like you're telling us it's about to get even more confusing. 'Cause
right.
if they mandate or suggests that you should be vaccinated to do certain things, then I guess very simply, you're not going to be able to do certain things.
Right, and then enter, Southwest and the airline companies saying, but wait, we need more money now because nobody's traveling after they got $60 billion from the COVID relief bill.
It gets interesting, and that's why we want to bring Jamie Finch into this conversation, because this is a man who worked for the National Transportation Safety Board, which means he has a little bit of experience with this kind of stuff. And stick around, because you may have some questions that don't come to my mind, because I'm kind of confused, Jamie. I'm trying to, and I get it. This is not easy for, federal officials to try and figure out. So, are they making sense to you, or do you think they've confused this thing more than they should have?
Well, if the government's involved, it's probably more confused than it should be.
Of course.
So, and no one, there's no true leadership on some of these things, and because there's been so much confusion about where are we going with it, and so some of the airlines have created their own mandates. A few of them, just United, Hawaiian, and Frontier, I think, are the only ones so far.
I've been flying American a lot lately, and you cannot have alcohol unless you're sitting in first class, and that's an American rule, because when I flown Delta, you can have alcohol in the main area.
Well, I just flew Southwest just a few weeks ago, and you can't have any alcohol, period.
Anywhere, right. Only the crew.
Per usual.
And they need it these days.
Well, yeah, because there's been a shortage of staff, and staff includes flight crew, the pilots, the ground crew at the airports have been shortchanged, and so there's a huge pressure on the airlines.
Let me stop you for a minute. Didn't you tell me earlier today in my office that there's this thing that, is it American, who's asking people to work for free?
Yeah, it was actually in June, this past June. They asked employees to work for free, saying that, we can't pay you. But again, they got a $60 billion from the stimulus bill. They weren't supposed to lay anybody off. They weren't supposed to cut pay. There was a Senate hearing just last month where they found out that they did cut people, and they did cut pay.
So what sayeth you, airline expert, about that?
Well, there's going to be some comeuppance on that, I think, because Congress is going to be looking into it, and more so, and I think that they're going to follow the money, but per usual, the companies are going to do pretty much what they want to do, and also, quite frankly, I can't blame them in some ways because they had to survive, and so the companies had to survive. That was the #1 goal for them, and they have done that. They had this huge surge of buying in the summer because all the Americans were wanting to travel, but now this new Delta variant is impacting this thing so much because, and now there's a retraction on these.
Would you suggest for anyone who's not unvaccinated to even try to travel, especially overseas? Or would you say, as a guy who knows this business, don't even try?
I think that you're going to run into more trouble overseas than you are in the United States. I think you need to stay domestic for right now.
If you're unvaccinated.
If you're unvaccinated.
Right.
Quite frankly, everyone needs to get vaccinated.
Right,
but it is one of those things that it's going to be hard to make everyone get vaccinated. But we've got to get to a critical mass with everyone being vaccinated, or we're going to have to keep going back into these mask, no cycles that we've been going through.
And that's what makes it hard. When I get on a plane, I'm sure you guys agree. I don't know who's vaccinated and who isn't vaccinated.
Well, and people lie. Quite frankly, that's what they do. They just
who's
tell
checking?
lies. Exactly. And it's not like you've had a card. But I can tell you this: just last week here in D.C., I was going out with some friends to a bar. bar. I never go out to a bar. And I was like, okay, let's meet for a drink. And we had to have our vaccination cards ID, proof of it to get in, get in the door.
They say that's the trend that's coming. So get ready, boys and girls.
Also, travel vaccination passports are coming. So just be ready for it.
I hope when you had that drink, you behaved yourself.
I bet you he did.
Jamie's the best. Thanks for joining us and sharing all that you know with us. We appreciate it. So here's a news story that sounds an awful lot like the beginning of a joke. You ready? It goes like this. So what are Bill Gates, Jeff Bezos, and Michael Bloomberg doing in Greenland? The answer has nothing to do with the bar, but it does have to do with rare earth minerals, which are instrumental to their pocketbooks. Here's correspondent John Huddy with the billionaire plans.
Greenland, here comes the money. Billionaires Bill Gates, Jeff Bezos, and former New York City Mayor Michael Bloomberg, among others, want to drill through Greenland's thick ice to find raw materials to power a new generation of electric cars. Kabul Metals, a mineral exploration company backed by Breakthrough Energy, which is funded by Gates, Bezos, Bloomberg, and other prominent billionaires, including investment banker Ray Dalio and Virgin Galactic's Richard Branson, has entered into a joint venture with the London-based mining company Blue Jay Mining to mine Greenland for raw materials such as nickel, copper, and platinum. As the company writes on its webpage, Kabul Metals is a mineral exploration company that uses machine learning and other scientific computing techniques to increase the ethical supply of critical materials needed to build electric vehicles and personal electronics. Many new mines will be needed if electric vehicles are to become widespread, but before new ore deposits can be mined, they must be found. So, why Greenland? Well, Blue Jay's own studies show the central west region of Greenland is reportedly similar to Russia's Norilsk region, a large producer of nickel and palladium. Kobold says it will spend $15 million to help Blue Jay locate natural resources, the first phase of the so-called DISCO project. Named after the region in Greenland, they'll be searching to hunt down and dig up world-class battery metal deposits, according to the companies. Clearly, it's a business venture for the Billionaire Boys Club and an opportunity for the U.S. and U.K. through this wealthy mining and exploration adventure to put some pressure on China and its massive mining and raw materials market. Greenland has been the subject of discussion among America's political and financial elite in the past. In 2019, then-President Trump even floated the idea of the U.S. buying Greenland because of its abundant natural resources, an idea that ultimately floated away and sunk like a glacier. Whether or not this billionaire blitz turns Greenland's icy water and polar caps blue like cobalt and green like the color of money being invested in the venture remains to be seen. For the News with Rick Sanchez, John Huddy.
Bert Chapman is a professor of government information and history and political science at a Big Ten school. I went to Minnesota. He happens to be at Purdue. I'm hoping my football team beats his this year, but let's not talk football. Let's go ahead and talk about something a little more important, which has to do with these rare earth minerals. It makes all the sense in the world that the United States or China or any other big government or country would want to go into a country that is lowly populated. That may not make a lot of sense, but you know what I mean. And go ahead and extract those rare earth minerals because that's the gasoline of the future. What's weird about this is these aren't governments discussing this. These are billionaires who have probably a lot to gain by being able to accrue these rare earth minerals. Is that what it comes down to, the bottom line, the dollar, right?
Well, somewhat. Rare earths are the new great game in geopolitics, and mineral resources like gold and oil have been in the past. It's important for countries like the U.S., and its allies to have dependable access to the rare earths because they're used in various consumer electronics and in all kinds of weapon systems like the Joint Strike Fighter. And right now, we're dependent on rare earths from China, Australia, they're an ally of ours, and Afghanistan. And having access to them, potential access to them through Denmark will produce a lot more dependable supply chain.
But why would we see these guys somewhat superimposing themselves as a government lobby? I mean, these are just citizens of the United States. Let me just ask the question this way. Who the hell are they to go to some country and negotiate mineral rights? It seems out of bounds.
Well, they've got the money and the name recognition. And so they obviously, to enhance their financial bottom line and potentially their egos and even reputations, they want to get in on what they see as a new piece of action.
But I guess my question to you is, as somebody who studies this kind of thing, especially geopolitics, is this a slippery slope when we're privatizing something as exchanges, deals, relationships, treaties, and allowing billionaires, trillionaires in some cases it seems, to be doing something like this? Is this cause for concern for you?
I don't think so, because the governments are going to get involved in this as well because of the strategic and economic significance of rare earths.
What about the
I mean, there's been plenty of discussion of rare earths in government literature and debate for many, many years.
What about the possibility that these guys could step on it and create some kind of problem? I mean, you know, escalation of diplomatic relations with not just this country, but maybe one other.
That's something that would have to be worked out between the relevant governmental agencies in different countries and Gates, Bloomberg, and Bezos.
Yeah, I'm telling you, it's a brave new world, and we're glad we had you here to talk about it because it is a fascinating story.
Thank you.
There's more questions than there are answers at this point. You're the best, Professor. Go Boilermakers. Thank you very much. That's our news. We'll look for you again when it's time to do news again.